Watch this.
Single shot of whiskey, fucking make it double. All my people with me always making trouble. I just hit a fast pass drink. Fuck a quiet night, I'm wide awake at 3:30. Yeah. God, I used to struggle trying to up a level. Pushing every limit, no, we never settle. So many people turned their back when I was trying to blow. Now I'm thinking we should let them know.
Hey friends, thanks for joining us today. On this program, we're going to go over how to take furniture that we commonly will print in PLA, PLA Plus, PETG, and turn it into something that has authentic looking wood grain finish. Now these components are often going to be stocks or grips that we might want to, put on props or actually put on firearms that we're planning on using. Either way, this technique will work and it'll yield fantastic results that I think you'll be surprised at how awesome they are. Good examples of this would be this KC9XL. Now this was printed by me. I made the stock and the retainer in PLA Plus, sanded it down, and went through this technique that I'm about to show you. And I mean, I'm pretty thrilled. I'm tickled with it. I mean, it's phenomenal. It came out well, even despite all the contours of the stock. Man, I am thrilled. Now this is a black walnut varnish or stain that I used to get this color, and it's multiple coats that kind of darkens it and adds a little depth to that. Now this thing is pretty dope. It's held up to quite a bit of use, and you might notice that it has a little bit of a sheen to it, and that's going to be a satin clear coat that we apply at the very end that gives it a little protection to scuffs, and also makes it look like a nice lacquered wood grain stock. So it's pretty awesome, pretty phenomenal, and I think you're truly going to be surprised with what you can do yourself with this technique. Prop wise, you have the Lewis gun inspired T-21B from Star Wars. Now this gun is only in the games, so if you don't play Battlefront, you probably have never seen it. But in real life, the Lewis gun, which doesn't quite have this vacuum adapter to it, it's kind of a straight barrel. It has a water-cooled shroud for the barrel, and it has these radiator fins here that I imagine get pretty hot. It was the first light machine gun that was designed for infantry. They have modified versions that are for anti-aircraft or for aircraft firearms in the planes, or I guess air-to-air. And it's actually one of those guns that has quite a bit of cool history. Originally, an American made it. He chambered it in 30-06, and we said, no, that's not really cool for us. We don't need something like that. So he says, screw you guys, and went to Belgium. And those dudes were like, yeah, we'll make that for you. And they chambered it in 303 and sold it to the British. And so in 1917, it really kind of had its debut, and it got a lot of action. So it's a pretty cool gun with a lot of history. The actual Lewis gun you might have seen in Peaky Blinders with some hard-ass guy carrying it like that. But for the most part, it's a pretty sweet gun. Besides that, this is the general shape that the stock has for the Lewis gun, and the same with the grip profile. Pretty much this whole area, the receiver, looks the same, minus the double scopes that Star Wars loves, like the redundant optics. But a good example of why I'm showing this is that there's an area that looks like a crack right here where this pin is. And so that's actually where a dog hair was in my stain, because those little rascals just run around constantly while I'm working. And it shows you that we can turn these happy little accidents and turn them into something that's going to make this wood have a little bit of character. And that's the beautiful thing about wood. Wood it's unique, it's different, and every piece is individually just unique. And just like that, the pieces that I make, the pieces that you make are all going to be one of a kind. And that's the beautiful thing about this technique. And if you think about the life of a wood or a tree, that those rings of the tree, the spacing is determined by the stress, the hardships, everything that tree goes through. A lot of stress, premature, or grows prematurely. Those rings are a little bit tighter, and you're going to see that in the wood grain. And that's what's beautiful about it, is that stress, hardship, obstacles that we have to overcome, those challenges, they all build character in the wood, just like they build character in ourselves. And so I think that, it's one of those things that can be spoken about wood that we don't really reflect on, is that we can choose to either let those obstacles and stress become a hindrance to us and hold us back and be not very great shape, or they can allow us to build character that will make us unique in an aspect that no one else is. And so with that, I think we should light up our smoke. Pour ourselves a cold one. Forgot the beverage, you know what I'm saying? And let's get started. Into the supplies that we're going to need for this project. Typically, we're going to need your model that you're planning on adding wood grain finish to. And that's typically going to be a stock or some sort of grip component. So then you're going to need various grits of sandpaper. I like anywhere from 80 to about 240 or 360. That's going to get you pretty darn smooth. I recommend using hand sanding. Some people use orbital sanders, and that's great for a lot of flat surface. But if you have something with a lot of contours, such as this stock down here, a lot of that is going to be needed to be done by hand, just because it's going to be easy to dig in and cause grooves. Also, PLA tends to burn and get warm really fast from the friction. So orbital sander is not recommended. Sorry, don't mind the cat. She's quite a rascal, isn't she? She's a little devil. So don't mind her. You're also going to want maybe a sanding block if there's a flattish surface that you're going to want to go over, such as here on the retainer. Again, down there's so many contours. Scotch pads work really good for getting those kind of rounded areas that you're wanting to make sure you get smooth before you apply the primer, paint, and stain. You're going to want to use some sort of filler primer. Now, this is just regular primer. I tend to use it also. Filler would be easier. Some sort of gray is fine. The two-stage or the double combos where it's primer paint combo, that'll work fine. I just prefer flat black for that. So I typically will do a gray just because I think when I sand it, it helps me see high spots that I need to fix and scratches. Then I'll follow that up with a flat black. Really, I'm not brand specific. Whatever is around is what I'll use. And then on top of that flat black, this is our bread and butter. This is the warm caramel that Rust-Oleum offers, and a satin finish is what I recommend. Oh man, she is just a nut. Look at that cat. Isn't she something? Isn't she something? Just a barn cat that we rescued about 10 years ago, and she's ornery, I tell you. But we'll do this warm caramel, put that layer on there, and that's going to be our base coat for our stain. And it's got a kind of natural wood color. It's really ugly by itself, but once we add the stain, it'll just pop and it'll be brilliant. The staining that I recommend is going to be Minwax, and this is their semi-transparent dark walnut. I like it because you can basically get a very light coat if you're going for a lighter color, and if you can do multiple coats to really darken it and add depth if you're looking for that sort of finish, versus some of the other woods are very light, like gunstock. Very light, takes multiple coats to get it dark and looking fresh. If it's too dark to start with, it's very hard to get it lightened even with that warm caramel. So dark walnut, phenomenal. I also recommend some sort of masking tape so that you can mask off areas like on that retainer, the rails. I did not want them wood grain, so I masked them off as they are part of the model. And most importantly, you're going to need a cheap-ass chip brush. This is what we're going to apply that stain with. It's going to get destroyed. You don't want to spend a lot of money on a nice brush, and that coarseness really does help add to our the striations of the wood grain. So I tell you, she's just isn't she something? It's an attention hog. But the ways that you can really also sand, and I do all of these, is to use resin. You can apply a thin coat of UV resin if you have SLA printers, and let that settle and kind of fill in those cracks. UV it, wipe it down with isopropyl alcohol to take off all the oxidized resin so that it's not tacky and gross. Once that dries, you can sand it pretty well, and it really does help quite a bit. Another thing I've done is like getting wood filler, like the putty, and mixing it with like a water. You know, you kind of have to tinker with the dosage. You can do the same thing. Put a thin coat on there, let it dry. That takes some time. See how smooth it is, sand it maybe a little bit. Again, if it's not completely dry, it's going to gum up your sandpaper, so give it plenty of time. And then apply another coat to it if you need to fill in more cracks. Really, the resin is the quickest way, in my opinion. I will usually use sandpaper, smooth it out, get all the knock off all the high points or the grooves or like the Z banding or anything like that. And then I will go through with the resin to kind of just fill in layer lines. After that, a nice sanding, filler primer on top just to kind of cover my bases. And sometimes at that filler primer stage, you get it done, you start sanding, you say, wow, there's a crack in there, or there's a scratch or something that I need to get. And, that's nothing wrong. You can just sand it out and put another coat on there. So next, I'll show you kind of the process on the actual application of the wood grain with the stain, because that's going to be the biggest question that I think most people have. All right, so let's get started. So this is our model here. I've got it sanded, primed, painted with the warm caramel from Rust-Oleum. They don't sponsor me or anything. It works really well. There's other paints that people have recommended that I've tried and they work great. It really just kind of depends on what base coat you want. The biggest things we're going to go over is just kind of the mindset getting into it, because it's really fast paced compared to other types of techniques and painting and things like that. So the stain, once it actually gets applied, starts to get tacky pretty fast, even though the entire drying period is pretty long. And so we're going to want to be pretty deliberate with our strokes. We're going to make sure that we're going in a none of that wax on stuff. We're going single direction with our passes, with our strokes, because we're trying to give it a straight edge that wood grain would typically have. Now, you can kind of deviate, zigzag, kind of go like a little crooked. Maybe you want to put a knot there, maybe something not on the tree or got a branch cut off at some point. We can add character like that at any step of the process, but we want to have in mind what we're wanting to do. And in the words of Bob Ross, you need to visualize what your painting looks like. And if you can visualize it up here, you can put it out there. But the most important part of that is that you have to believe in yourself and know that you can do anything that you put your mind to. So with that, let's get started. First, you need your cheap ass chip brush, and you're gonna do the best part. You're gonna beat the devil out of it. If you've used it before, you want to get all your clumps out. If it's a fresh brush, it might be decent just to do that, just to invoke the spirit of Bob to be with you. So, it can't hurt. You really want to just get a little bit of paint on the tip of the brush, just the tip. I've got a paper towel under my can, and I'm just basically dipping it very gently, rubbing it on the edge of the can, trying not to have a ton of fluid. And then I'm just gonna stroke it just one way. And then I'm trying to essentially get that stuff spread out. And then once it's spread out, pretty even coat, I'm going back to my straight wood grain direction. You kind of want to go crosshatch just a little bit, and then once it starts getting tacky on you, you better start being quick. I'm dabbing my brush so that it can wick up just a little bit more of that stain, because I don't want it to quite be that dark, because you can always go back and add another layer if you want it to be darker than what your results are. I'm getting a lot of buildup over here on the top part, so I'm coming back the other direction now, but it's still kind of the same direction, right? It's going from back to front or front to back, and just look at that. Just look at that. That's what we're here for, boys. I'm hoping that I'm not glaring it too much if my lighting sucks, but that's downright ideal. And it's starting to get tacky, and so I'm just gonna leave it move on. You know, I'm gonna rotate to kind of the other side, just because it's so narrow of an area. I'm getting just a tiny little bit on my brush, on the corner of my brush, and then I'm gonna go to the dry section of my brush, and I'm just gonna do the same thing. Kind of cross hatch it, try and get a nice medium coat throughout the entire surface, and just back and forth. Now we're Mr. Miyagi in it. Once you get that initial coat on there, you can really start to be gentle and light with it. You really don't want to put a lot of pressure, really ever, in the deal. I've been talking so much and I ain't been puffing, so my homeboy went out. That's a KO Moon Trance. It's bourbon vanilla. It's fucking delicious. So if that's your kind of thing, I would do it. We're gonna go back onto the other side now. Got just this corner of the brush wet, and I'm just using that to try and spread that even coat. And then I'm gonna go back with the dry section of my brush, right? And I'm just gonna go back and forth and try and work it and blend it in, especially up here at the corner. I wanna make sure that my corners aren't getting a little too much attention. Naturally, when you stain things, the stain's going to kind of accumulate in areas like it normally would, as if you were staining. So like up here at the end of my brush stroke, it's going to accumulate at the end of the stock. So that's pretty natural looking. And so we're heading in the right direction. Now that I'm here and I've got this weird surface, I'm going to be mindful because I don't want a ton of my stain accumulating in the recesses of this tidbit. So I'm going to kind of do the same thing I did on the sides in these narrow areas, because I don't want the majority of the brush to pass over and drop a lot of stain in those recesses. So I'm going to kind of start there first because I can lightly go over it later at the end of the process and not have to worry too much about excess stain. So, whoa, that's a lot of stain there, but we'll make it work. We will make it work. Just try and soak some of that up. Make sure we're covering the front where it's at. We want to try and get a lot of that out of there though, really before it starts to get tacky. So I'm kind of having to change my plan. I'm going just a little bit faster. And I'm sorry if my shadowing and I'm blocking the view, and I hope the glare doesn't suck, because I don't really have another model to paint to show you that's ideal, like a stock like this. So I really hope this turns out well, and I hope you're learning something, but the majority of it is just having the bravery and the courage to try, because you'll be surprised with what you can do if you just put your mind to it and accept failure, but don't accept defeat. Everyone fails here and there. Everyone does things that they wish they would have done different, but it's those people who quit and never try again that have truly lost. If you keep on trying and just working that in, trying to give it a nice even brown, we're going to be in good shape. Look at that. It's a little funny looking down here, so I'm going to try and cross hatch it so it looks a little more natural and not one directional. Basically, if you think about it, we're trying to put a bunch of little scratches that are going to simulate the wood grain, and then we're topping them all off with a single directional scratch that is going to give it direction, or the illusion of direction. And it's starting to get tacky, so I need to just stop it while I'm ahead. It's starting to kind of pull stain where I don't want it. Now for the last bit, you really want to be careful, because I don't want to have to try and disperse extra stain really anywhere. But I'm just going to drop it on the top. Pop, drop, and lock it, I guess. I don't know. Never really learned that dance. And I'm trying to, this is a kind of goofy area to really make it look natural, because it's kind of the end of the wood, right? So unless you're going to have a fine little toothbrush or something and go through and just kind of add little deviations or knots here, I try and stroke it down this way, because again, it's going to be like kind of end on. But ultimately, I want to make sure that it's not affecting my sides. You know, I want it to look like it's a nice gradual transition to the back of the stock, because that's the part that people are going to see, is this part. No one's going to look at the back of the stock and be like, wow, that looks fake. And then you can be like, bro, it is fake. But so I don't really spend a ton of time worrying about the back, other than just trying to make it look not obvious. You know, I'm trying to make sure that it doesn't stick out, but I'm not trying to make it look immaculate or ideal. And man, I'm sorry for kind of blocking the view here. It's my studio pretty much blows. So, but after that, I mean, I'm tickled with this. So let me try and get a better view for you. But like that looks pretty dope. I mean, all surfaces look like an old school desk. I mean, that's that dark walnut stain, and it does just about what it's supposed to. And so the next step is going to be letting this dry. You really want it to be in a pretty well ventilated area, hopefully a place that's somewhat filtered so you're not getting dander and fuzzies and stuff getting stuck to it. I've had this stage be tacky for dang near a week. And so you might dry and you might be able to touch it and be like, wow, it's not leaving a fingerprint. But then the second you actually pick it up and just apply a little force, you end up leaving a fingerprint, and you're like, I hate my life. Then you have to redo this again. So I like to err on the side of caution. Let it sit somewhere like this where there's not a ton of airflow for, probably an hour or two, and then maybe move it to some place where there's all right airflow and not a whole lot of dander and debris in the air. Once that's dry, and again, some of these I've had never get dry. They're still tacky. You still could push in on it and get it wet. I said to hell with it. I'm going to put it outside, and I'm going to spray a satin clear coat on it. That satin clear coat is going to cover it, keep it with this kind of shiny, lacquered look, and it's also going to prevent it from being dinged or really chipped or anything to some degree. Two or three coats of that satin clear really is going to kind of preserve that color, give it a nice lacquered look that's not too ridiculous like gloss, and prevent it from being able to be damaged. But I'm pretty happy with that, and I hope everyone has learned something. And if you have any questions, let me know. And so with that, happy staining, God bless, and most importantly,
Skip your balls or content.